Deputy Eoghan Murphy, 10 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I do not sit on the Education Committee, but the Minister, the Chairperson will both know that this is an area that I'm very interested in. And the Minister will know this in particular because, of course, we represent the same constituency and we've debated the issues in here on many an occasion. But you might be glad to hear today that I'm not going to be raising any constituency-specific issues, but we'll be sticking to the bill or the proposed bill and the report that came from the committee. We do have a problem with admissions to schools in this country, and we do have a problem in particular in certain constituencies, one being my own, where there's massive oversubscription and a huge demand for particular schools. And what this created for us is a waiting list system, and in some cases it stretches to 11 years, which is incredible. And what the system does is it discriminates against people who might have just moved to an area. Maybe they're moving up from the country, maybe they're moving within Dublin. But they have no chance in relation to the local schools because of these waiting list systems. What it also does is it creates anxiety and stress for parents because they're given a holding number 3, 4, 5 years out, and they're not sure actually then, maybe perhaps even in the preceding 12 months, if their child will get a place in the local school. And that's a very difficult thing for parents to have to deal with. And often then what it results in as well, it's a system where children cannot be educated in the local school, in their local community. And that's not the kind of model of education we want in this country. We want children, particularly at the primary level, to be able to attend school in the local community, so they can walk to school, it's good for their health and fitness, they can make friends in the area where they grow up, and they can be close to home as well, because they're still at a young age. Sometimes what I'm seeing in my constituency is because of this problem, this oversubscription, and it's not just oversubscription, but it is the way that the waiting lists are managed. It leads to the position where parents have to send their children to fee-paying schools, and they can't afford to. So it stretches them financially. They take out loans, they borrow from family members, and that's not right either. And I think when that is the case, and it is the case in certain areas, it represents a failing on the part of the state. But I am very glad that it's a failing that this government is trying to address. We haven't yet debated the legislation or the details of it because we haven't had a chance to get to second stage. But I do very much welcome the robust reforms that the Minister is pursuing in this area. I think it's incredibly important and it's long overdue. And one of the key things or the fears that are expressed to me is about how the department might be trying to centralise power in the department to have control over schools in relation to admissions in other areas. And I think we have to keep on refuting that, because really what we're trying to do here is move to a system that's open, transparent and fair. A system that works for educators and parents alike, a system which currently works for neither. And that's the primary goal always, and making sure that the best interests of the child are at the centre of that. And that's what we're trying to pursue. And I think it behoves all of us as parliamentarians to keep on repeating that mantra, because there are people coming from particular areas or interest groups that are raising particular fears that I don't think are warranted. In any case, we'll get a chance to get stuck into the debate when we move to the next stage from contemplating what might be in the legislation and what will be in the legislation to actually debating the details in each section as we go through them, and I do look forward to that. I commend the chairperson on her work and all of the committee. They've spent a huge amount of time on this. If you look at the report, and it's very detailed, it's a lengthy report. They had a number of submissions, I think about 60 into the report. They had a number of public hearings, and they've considered this, and they've gone through it, and it's important that that committee is commended for that work, because it's not always noticed, and it might not be so sexy for the media or whatever else, and so it doesn't get the amount of column inches that it should be getting, but it's something that really concerns parents. So when you speak to parents and you tell them this work is happening, or the committee is debating, they appreciate that. And when you're able to say, well, look, here's the report that came from the committee, they go, well, thank you very much. And they look at it and they get involved themselves, and then they make comment to you. I did hold a public meeting myself in Donnybrook that was held by educators and parents and some officials to debate the kind of proposals that were in the ether at the time from the heads of the bill. And it was great to do that. And it was great to have people coming and to see the kind of passion they had. People were coming from particular interests, be it Gaelscoil or fee-paying schools. People were coming from the perspective of principals. And that was all very interesting, and it fed into it. Unfortunately, the submission's not listed, though, in the Appendix 5 to the report. I'm sure it's just an oversight. But what I might do a little later is just read a couple of proposals that were made at that meeting, because I think they're worth reading into the debate and commenting upon. And just to look at a couple of the conclusions in the report, actually, before I do that. The first conclusion, and it ties into the second conclusion as well, is the lack of diversity of school types. I really think it's incredible in 2014 that most parents in this country don't really have a choice of school in terms of not sending their child to a religious school. And they may not get into the local school because their child is not of the right religion, or they might be discriminated against or further down the list because they haven't been baptized. And Minister, some people scoff at you for pursuing this area, and forget that. This is absolutely the right way to go. Parents want choice. They want to know that they can send their child to a local school and that will reflect their own beliefs and their own ethos. And they should be able, I mean, it's not, I mean, really the key point of things is about them not getting into the school because they aren't of the right religion. And I've had parents come to me and they've baptized their children to get their child further up the waiting list. And that's ridiculous. But that's the society we're living in at the moment. And that's why I urge you to keep on going with those reforms. And it's partly in relation to admissions, but it's also in relation to patronage, and more work needs to be done there. So please do keep at it. In relation to conclusion 7 in the report, which is the derogation, I think, for past pupils, I don't agree with this conclusion, I'm afraid. And you know, I think there should be a derogation for children of past pupils. And I think the current proposal from the Minister, as far as I'm aware, it still stands at 25%, and I think that is modest. But many parents will know that a lot of work done in a school, both in the actual school itself, but also out of hours, is done by the parents, and it's done on a voluntary basis. And that's because they have a connection or association with the school, because they went there themselves, and they continue to stay involved in the hope that the school continue to be the school that they went to when their children go there, because they want to send their children there. So they give this huge amount of time to the school, and they get involved in extracurricular activities. They do bake sales, they hold fundraising events for the school, which is an important source of income for every school in the state, because no state or no school in the state today exists purely on the money it gets from the state. It comes from the parents getting involved, volunteering, helping to raise money for different initiatives. And if there is a derogation to allow past pupils to attend, parents will stay involved and they'll continue doing that work. And as a result, everyone in the school benefits. It's not just the children of the past pupils. Everyone in the school benefits from these parents taking more of an interest and getting more involved in the local school. And in relation to conclusions 11 and 12, which concern cooperation between schools in a geographical area in relation to admissions, that's a really key one, I think, because what you do have sometimes, I know this September Minister in our own constituency is a bit of an exception in terms of the explosion that we've had, but sometimes the places are there. It's not just about providing extra schools, but because the way the system is managed between schools, because it's not necessarily cooperative, it means that there is unnecessary anxiety right up until the last minute, and we need to try and do our best to get rid of that. Just to turn back, if I might, in the remaining minutes, to the meeting that I held last November, and just a couple of points I wanted to read from the report of that meeting, because I thought they were of particular interest. And that meeting was held in November, so some of this might be just a little bit outdated at this point. But in relation to inclusivity and resource management, it was noted that the obligation on schools to operate inclusive admissions policies insofar as children who have special educational needs was strongly welcomed at the meeting. However, the issue of sufficient resources for schools was raised in this context. The necessary support would have to be forthcoming from the department and in a timely manner. Schools had to be confident of operating an inclusive admissions policy without fear of being unable to secure the necessary resources to do so. When it came to the area of Gaelscoil, it was confirmed that Irish proficiency could still be used as an admission criteria, and I hope that remains. However, there was no derogation in the present proposals to allow Gaelscoil to continue the practice of holding admission interviews to determine that the applying people came from an Irish-speaking family. It was said that this would also impact upon the management of waiting lists for the period of the sunset clause on waiting lists in the legislation that will be in there. And this would present practical problems for Gaelscoil now, which would need to be addressed during the legislative process. In relation to past pupils, it was noted that the past pupil provision for admissions, holding a maximum of 25% of places for children of past pupils, was not time-bound. The figure itself was not yet a definitive one, and this was at the time, though any increase in the proposed figure in the course of approving the legislation would mean further discrimination against other areas of admission. And it was recommended that the past pupil criteria be applied separately to other criteria, such as sibling preference. So, for example, the first child of a past pupil to attend the school would be admitted as part of the past pupil criterion. His or her future sibling would not, as they would qualify separately under the sibling rule. And this area would need to be clarified further in the legislation. And just a couple of miscellaneous areas that I won't go into in detail because I don't have the time. Issues were also raised, Minister, around the designation of primary schools as feeder schools for secondary schools, which should be permissible, was the view of the meeting. The practice of fee-paying schools using ability to pay as a criterion for admission, which should continue, and the eligibility of foster children under different criteria, which should be addressed in terms of the definition of guardianship in the legislation. Minister, I've sent you this report, so I know you've seen it, and I know the chairperson has seen it as well in the committee. It wasn't listed in the appendix as one of the submissions. But just to conclude, a huge amount of work has gone into this already, and that's to be noted as well, because it's part of the reforms that this government has brought in how we now deal with legislation. And I'm very anxious that we get to the actual phase of debating the legislation, because we want to see this come into law as quickly as possible, because it will take a couple of years for the system to correct itself as to the new provisions of admission, particularly in relation to the operation of waiting lists. And I have parents in my own constituency, which is yours, Minister, and I'm sure everyone does in their constituencies, who are anxious to see it come in, so they can have more confidence in being able to have their child educated in one of the local state schools. But I do commend the chairperson and the committee for all their hard work in this area. Thank you.